Hey everyone, welcome back to my series on the French Revolution. This is hopefully the last segment in our series, and we're going to talk a little bit today about the progression of events that take place starting in 1793 and then will end in 1799. So what we're going to see is that France will now be at war, not only with a lot of the problems that were going on within France and the fighting and the internal enemies, but also now with external enemies who are coming together from other countries to form a coalition against France. So in 1793, the first coalition is formed between Great Britain, Spain, Portugal, the Dutch Republic, Austria, and Prussia. And together they are very concerned about what's going on in France, as I mentioned in the last video. And they are concerned that the revolution is going to spread to their countries. They're concerned about the survival of the monarchy in general. And so they band together. And initially, France actually welcomes this because it can help to unify our country, which is pretty divided. But in the early days, France faces a string of defeats, and a crisis point is reached. The National Convention has to curb anarchy and counter-revolution at home, and also win the war by mobilizing the French people. So to do this, they realize a special executive committee is needed, and they create it, and this becomes known as the Committee of Public Safety. This committee is initially dominated by a man named Danton, who is a lawyer. He's active in local politics in Paris for a while, and then he ends up leaving politics for a while. He returns to Paris in 1791 and takes part in the Legislative Assembly and is elected as an assistant to the public prosecutor of the Paris Commune, and then as a minister of the Legislative Assembly. And he kind of dominated it by his strength of character, his ability to make quick decisions. But by 1793, he's become pretty disconcerted with the terror aspect. And so he quits politics, claiming it's for health or family reasons, and he returns to his native town in October, but then returns in November, and a whole bunch of things take place. You don't want to know a whole long history of Danton, although there is a really good movie from the 80s if you are interested in learning more about him. But he ends up becoming a big player in the revolution, mainly because he calls Robespierre out a number of times. And he really doesn't think that Robespierre is going to arrest him. And so he doesn't flee, but he was arrested. His trial is notoriously unfair. It's totally bogus. At these trials, even the accused themselves are not allowed to speak, and so he and his accomplices are declared guilty in absentia, meaning in their absence. And so Danton does go to the guillotine. And at his beheading, Danton says, "Infamous Robespierre, the scaffold is calling for you. Your house shall be razed. You shall follow me." His last words then to the executioner were, "Show my head to the people. It will be worth it." So very dramatic. But in the end, Danton is executed by the National Razor, as they call it, and Robespierre ends up taking over completely. So Robespierre sets up this thing called the Committee of Public Safety with 12 members led by him, and he ends up mobilizing an entire nation, the entire nation of France, to war. It is literally the first French army that is fighting for the people, not for the king, not even for the country of France, but for the people of France. And so, again, Robespierre is able to raise a very significant army, including women and children. They wanted all the help they could get, and this becomes the first truly nationalistic army in France. Now, we are going to enter another phase, another significant phase called the Reign of Terror, the moment we've all been waiting for. So the Reign of Terror is led by this group called the Jacobins, and it begins in July of 1793 and runs through 1794. And what the problem is at this point is not only is France dealing with a lot of internal turmoil, a lot of perceived enemies of the state, a lot of factions within France who are fighting each other over their different visions of what the revolution should be and what it should look like and what processes they should go through. But now they are also having to face external enemies, these coalitions that are forming against them, these other European conservative countries that want to make sure that they curb revolution and don't allow the revolution to spread. So the Reign of Terror is initially led by the National Convention and the Committee of Public Safety. And the victims range from Queen Marie Antoinette to former revolutionary Girondins such as Olympe de Gouges, all the way down to peasants. And within a period of about 9 months, 16,000 people had gone to the guillotine. The victims overall of the French Revolution are probably closer to 50,000 people. So we're talking a lot of death in a very short amount of time. Often these killings were carried out in cities that were considered not fully on the same page with the revolutionaries, what they perceived to be rebellious cities such as Vendée, Marseille, and Lyon, that tended to be more conservative cities. But this was a very wide-ranging experience across France during this period of roughly a year. So 12 men claim that they need to take emergency control and, make sure that they can reestablish order. And by the way, anytime anyone ever tells you that, they are always lying. You can think about that with everyone from Julius Caesar to Adolf Hitler. But anyway, they claim that they just need to take this emergency control until order is restored, and that as soon as that happens, the so-called Republic of Virtue can begin. And if you can remember back to the Enlightenment, the later Enlightenment, Rousseau had this idea of a general will, something along the lines of that somehow magically when people make a contract with the government, that the cumulative will of the people will be enacted. And so at this point, Robespierre claims to be embodying this general will. He also tries to redistribute food and supplies, but that doesn't work very well. During the Reign of Terror, the role of women is also quite interesting in the radical phase of the revolution, because women now are demanding, again, food for their children. They form a society for revolutionary Republican women, it's mainly a working class society. And a lot of men really resented this. They did not want women interfering. They still believed in very traditional roles for women. And so they outlawed their political clubs and their presence at political meetings. And all of this was based on the idea that women asserting themselves was somehow unnatural. Again, a lot of these ideas came from Rousseau. Nonetheless, you want to acknowledge the role that women played in the revolution, especially for the AP exam. Okay, so the next thing that we want to focus on is another process that Robespierre enacts called de-Christianization. He proclaims the official religion of France, the, quote, cult of the supreme being, in 1794. And what he's doing is really thinking in Enlightenment terms in many ways, thinking in deistic terms, And what he wants to do is essentially wipe away the old regime. And of course the church is very much, the Catholic Church is very much considered part of the old order that the French really want to completely erase from memory. And so it makes sense that they would make de-Christianization at the top of their agenda. So he pretty much destroys the Catholic Church in France for a short time and declares the new religion of France the cult of the supreme being. And then the revolutionaries begin changing the names of people. They want to de-Christianize their own names. So any name that comes from the Bible or from church history, they will change. They go ahead and change the names of streets. Any street that had the name Saint is removed, and it's replaced with more revolutionary, friendly terms. Churches were pillaged and closed, and priests were encouraged to marry. And if you have ever been to France, the beautiful Cathedral of Notre Dame, they try to de-Christianize the famous cathedral and turn it into what they call the Temple of Reason. So they rename Notre Dame as the Temple of Reason. They also changed the calendar, and I mentioned this in class. They got rid of Sunday. They started dating the years instead of from the birth of Christ, from the year 1 of the revolution. And this actually was a failure because most people refused to give up the old calendar and follow the new. They also changed the playing cards and removed all signs and symbols of royalty, like, jacks and kings and queens. And Robespierre just goes to all kinds of measures to try to erase France's very Catholic history. And overall, he is extremely unsuccessful. People are just not into it. And he realizes that it fails because at heart, most French people are still pretty Catholic. And he ends up creating more enemies than friends. Meanwhile, in July of 1794, all of these things are just sort of culminating in a lot of frustration, and Robespierre has just killed way too many people. He tries to justify the violence by claiming that it enables French citizens to remain true to the ideals of the French Revolution. He claims to be illuminated by a personal sense of truth, this intuitive sense of good and right. And he says, I want something better than the law. I want virtue. So he is literally drunk on his own power. And this is really going to just alienate the majority of people, and people just get tired of all the bloodshed. And so they decide something's got to be done. We've got to do something with Robespierre. So now here we are in July of 1794, and this is known as the Thermidorian reaction. It is a cooling down of all of this chaos and bloodshed. The National Convention members know that now no one is safe from Robespierre, and now they turn on him and have him beheaded. After Robespierre, and he's killed in a very violent way, but after he's killed, people swing to the right. They have had more than enough of the violence. Radical groups and clubs start shutting down. Churches are slowly allowed to reopen, and a more laissez-faire economics is reinstituted. That is, hands off. The government's not in so much control and not regulating everything like it had been for a while. And another constitution is created. So in a nutshell, this is a period of de-radicalization in France. And in 1795, a new phase of the revolution begins. This is known as the Directory phase. So again, more moderate people are speaking out. The moderates draft a new plan of government. They now have created their third constitution since 1789. So think about that. That's pretty crazy. That's less than 10 years, 3 constitutions. And part of this plan is to put a little bit more power in the hands of the bourgeoisie or the middle class, to establish a 2-house legislature and an executive body of 5 men known as the Directory. And the Directory, the main problem for them, well, they've got lots of problems, but one of them is that in order to stay in power, they have to be super dependent on the military. And that's not really a great way to retain power. So they have political enemies on both the right and the left. There's more uncertainty and more instability, so much so that an army general comes back and he engages in a coup d'etat in 1799. So this is, of course, Napoleon Bonaparte, who is a popular army general, and he seizes power from this Directory, which was pretty weak and not very well grounded in the first place. And so, although this sort of ends our French Revolution series, we are going to talk about Napoleon next, and we'll give him his own slideshow, so to speak. But in any case, he plays a very significant role in the next phase of the revolution. Many historians don't even think this is considered part of the revolution, that he really ended the revolution in many ways and started something else. Other people argue that he was sort of the culmination, the continuation of the revolution, and sort of the outcome that one might expect given the circumstances. So this is a question that may come up on your AP exam. Was Napoleon really a continuation of the revolution or its antithesis? But we'll have to leave that till a little later. I just want to end with a couple things, just a couple general comments. The significance of the French Revolution really cannot be underestimated. It was not, and I want you to hear this, not just a French affair. This was considered a major event in European history. It had profound effects all throughout Europe. And this claim of the universal validity of these values that we started off with, liberty, equality, and fraternity, are very significant. It shows the world the great potential and great disaster of major social revolutions, violent change, and it also shows the risks involved in trying to bring about changes in such a revolutionary or rapid, radical manner. It also raises a lot of dilemmas. There's always going to be a tension between liberty, which is really your individual freedom, and equality. How much do we take away your individual freedoms to try to make the world a more equitable place? There's also a tension inherent in the revolution in terms of being concerned about people versus being very idealistic and concerned about principles. And I think you see a few figures in the revolution, most notably Robespierre, who is so drunk on these principles and virtues that he completely loses his grip on reality and really doesn't care about people at all. And so these are things that you just want to think about as we go forward and study more European history. And again, I thank you for joining me. Sorry, this one was a bit long, and I hope that you'll join me for our series on Napoleon.